I want to thank our partners for their support of today's program. 9-4 Detroit, Detroit Public Television, PBS Folks, and Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. This is the final event of the fall season. The new winter season announcement will be coming soon, so please keep an eye out for that. And plan to join us in the new year when we reconvene on January 12th with Robin Frohart presenting The Plastic Bag Store in collaboration with UMS. We will have our regular Q&A today in the main theater here, following today's presentation. Please make your way to one of the microphones at the top of the aisles, just in front of the stage to ask your questions. A few words about our presenting partner today. Design Corps is an economic development nonprofit housed within the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. As stewards of Detroit UNESCO's City of Design designation, its mission is to establish Detroit as a globally recognized and valued hub for creative talent. They do this by providing support for design-driven small businesses, creating public platforms to showcase the latest works and ideas of our region's design, and championing inclusive design as a process for developing policy, community, and economic strategy. You can sign up for the Design Corps newsletter or join the Detroit Design Network at designcorps.org. A reminder to please turn on your cell phones now so as not to be disruptive to fellow audience members. Thank you. And now, for a formal introduction of today's speaker, please welcome Design Corps co-director, Barney.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. As the co-executive director of Design Corps Detroit, one of the main privileges of my job is the opportunity to work with the region's creative talent. And it is my honor to introduce one of my favorite designers from the region in tonight's presentation. Tracy Reese launched her namesake fashion line in in New York City in 1998. She quickly became known for her rich, bold colors and her unique patterns, established many sub-brands and many relationships with all of the major retailers. Michelle Obama wore a custom Tracy Reese dress when she addressed the Democratic National Convention in 2012, and other notable celebrities who Tracy has designed for include Sarah Jessica Parker, Tracee Ellis Ross, and Oprah Winfrey. Tracy is heavily involved in the industry and serves on many boards, including the board of the Council of Fashion Designers of America, Nest Artisan Guild, and ISAIC, which is Industrial Sewing and Innovation Center in Detroit, and the College for Creative Studies Fashion and Accessories Department. In 2019, Tracy made a commitment to slowing down fashion, to being more sustainable, more responsible, and producing more ethical lines to maintain and meet her own personal values. This is what brought her back home to Detroit. When I first met Tracy, she recalled how as a child she was exposed to many arts and cultural opportunities and places in the city of Detroit and had an opportunity to learn and experience many different kinds of art. This is when she first started learning to sew and to practice different creative pursuits. She credits those experiences to her decision to go to Parsons School of Design and to launch a career in fashion. When she made the decision to come home to Detroit, it was really important to her that she helped create those same opportunities for the future generation of designers and creative talent from our region. So since she's been home, she's also launched an arts enrichment program at Detroit Public Schools. And as I said earlier, has only involved in the work direction with marketing and how to establish Detroit as a global hub for fashion production.
I know that Tracy will spend part of her presentation tonight talking to you about her hope for flowers online, so I will let that be to her. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend, Tracy Reese.
Good evening. How is everyone? I'm excited to be here, honored to be here. Can't really see anybody, but when the lights come up later, hopefully I'll do it very I first of all want to thank everyone here at the stands for inviting me to be a part of this illustrious series, especially Christina Hamilton and Brittany Barnes, who worked out a lot of scheduling conflicts on my behalf. Thank you to Mark Jacobson and the production team here at Penn Stamps. I appreciate you and Maria Phillips. Thank you for being such a kind hostess and taking care of me while I've been here in Ann Arbor. You know, my story really begins in Detroit. I'm a native Detroiter, proud Detroiter, and the daughter of another proud Detroiter, my mom, Tracy Reese. And, you know, our family was always very much into the arts and cultural workings in Detroit, and that really impacted, you know, who I am, who I wanted to become. And I had a wonderful childhood in Detroit, and it's interesting, you know, outside of Michigan and outside of Detroit, when you say that, people are kind of astounded that I had a wonderful childhood there. I went to Detroit public schools all the way. And my mom was always on the scene. I have two sisters, one older, one younger. My older sister is a writer. My younger sister is an administrator here. She's an SVP and she can help. And she's probably, so, you know, we're very much about homes and finding the difference, a positive difference in our world. But our family, the Reeses, we were the first Black family in our neighborhood. And, you know, these were the 60s. And there was a white flight moment, you know, but we had so many wonderful neighbors who embraced us and, you know, helped make us an important part of the community. And, you know, it was just a great high school, a great childhood. What was really important for me outside of school was the opportunity to participate in Saturday art classes. That was huge. And I credit my mom, you know, greatly with that. She didn't want her daughters sitting around the house on a Saturday morning watching television. We were up. My dad would wake up break the bed. We had to help pick up sticks on the lawn so we could mow and then get our chores, and then we were off to classes. And I took classes at the YMCA, I took classes at local colleges that had programs for young people. I took classes at a wonderful place called the Resurgence House in Detroit, which was run by Mrs. Love. And they had programming in fine art as well as performing arts and music for young people in Detroit. So these were, you know, I had no idea as a young person what a difference all of those opportunities would make in my life. And I remember, you know, my dad, who was born in Alabama and really is a rags to riches story where he probably didn't have, you know, regular shoes until he was in his early teens because they couldn't afford it. And he really made something of himself. You know, he actually did his freshman year here at the University of Michigan. After he left the Navy, he had money to pay for 1 year of college, and then the money ran out, and he had to work. So he moved to Detroit and worked at Burroughs, and then ultimately went to Chrysler Corporation, where he worked for 33 years. But my dad provided a great living for us, and he was a hard worker, and I think that work ethic was instilled in each and every one of us. And even though, you know, I was a woman and a female and Black, I knew that I could make something of myself because I had so many incredible examples around me. My grandmother, Mary E. Cleveland, who just passed this year at the age of 104. Yeah, she's amazing. And she raised 4 kids, 1 musician, 1 actor, 2 dancers. She was the secretary to our Secretary of State, Richard Austin, for decades. She was first a secretary when he was in local government in Detroit and then went to Lansing. And she was a businesswoman, and she would take us on some of her business trips, my sisters and I, just so we could understand what the possibilities for us could be. And, you know, in the 40s and the 50s, she would sew for herself. She would make her own hats, and there were so many glamorous pictures of her, you know, in nightclubs, like wearing like custom hats that she made herself. And, you know, she was an incredible example for us. And she taught my mom to sew. My mom taught me to sew. So I probably made my first pair of pants when I was 9 years old. And back when I was in school, we still had economics. And I remember, you know, my mom taking me to the fabric store to get my fabric. And she said, you you already know how to sew. So instead of just making 1 pair of pants, you can make 2. And I will make you a top, you know, with one of those pairs of pants. And when you model those pants in the fashion show, and I was not, you can carry this second pair that you made over your arm. To demonstrate that you've got, you know, you made 2 pairs that you're very advanced. So there I was with, I think I wore the denim printed patchwork there. And I carried the white polyester double neck there over my arm. But, you know, I'm sad that they don't have home ec in schools anymore because we actually learn so much. And I really wanted to take shock. And I was in a conversation yesterday about that, about, you know, all of these skills, these life skills that, you know, have been taken out of schools that we desperately need because a lot of people don't know how to put a bed back on anymore. You know, that's a big deal. We talk about sustainability, and I'll get around to that later. But all that to say, this childhood education culminated in my Barney Cass Tech in Detroit. And Cass Technical High School was a magical place, and it still really is. But it's a magnet school, and it had curriculums, and I was in Science and Arts, which is an AG program, and allowed me to take electives in other programs in school. And, you know, Cass was living into a lot of place. The performing arts people would be up and down the hallways, singing songs for the next production. There were sororities and fraternities and spirit days and everything you could wish for in high school. And of course, there was fashion. And, you know, I didn't realize growing up that fashion was a profession. It was just, you know, it's something me and my mom did. My mom was an avid sewer. She sewed for me and my sisters. We had triplet outfits for big occasions. And she would let us, you know, pick out our own patches and decals and things that she would add to give it a personal touch. And we sewed together, and we would sew deep into the night. I can remember being like 13 years old, and Mom and I had a sewing competition, and it's just like, okay, whoever finishes this outfit first has to buy me an accessory. And we'd be in the basement sewing, listening to Michael Jackson. I remember my dad coming down there at 3 o'clock in the morning and looking at us like, what are you doing? It was just like we were, you know, we're making stuff. And if we go to the Ebony Fashion Fair, Detroit, the Fisher Theater, and wear our finery and parade up and down the hallways and all the lovely things that we made and spend all of our extra money on fabric. And when I was in high school, I worked at a fabric store called House of Fabrics, which is an vintage building in downtown Detroit. And that's where all my money went. All of us who worked at the store basically would put our paychecks in the till and take it and take home a bag of fabric. And anyone who is crafty or sews or knits like Maria knows that, you know, we have a lot of fabric at home, a lot of yarn, a lot of projects that are waiting in the wings to be made. I had some amazing teachers at that. And in the fashion design classes that I took there, that were led by Dr. Cootie Taylor, who is an amazing artist and a collector in Detroit. She saw something and she said, you know, you might want to consider going to Parsons School of Design because I think that you have what it takes to be a designer. And that was the first time I even thought that I might want to design for a living, that it could be a possibility. First thought I had to do something highly technical. I wanted to do something technical yet creative. So I was thinking architecture, or maybe even, you know, something as fun as interior design. But fashion design, that was a new concept for me. And I ended up going to New York for a summer. I got a scholarship at Parsons to attend the high school program or summer program for high school students. And it really opened my eyes to what the industry really was. I had no idea that fashion was such a huge industry, that it employed so many people, that it was like at the time, it was like the number 10 export of the United States of America. And being in New York and seeing, you know, in the heart of the Garment District, seeing fashion in action and really learning the rudiments of the work excited me. And I knew that I wanted to pursue it as a career. So, you know, courtesy of Detroit Public Schools and the portfolio that I built there, I was admitted to Parsons for college, and I got a full scholarship. And not only that, they said, you know, you don't have to go to foundation year, which they call first year. You can start sophomore year because you're very advanced. And, you know, I always tell this story because it's tremendously important for people to know that it's possible, and it was possible in Detroit, in public school, to be competitive and to be able to compete with kids from all over the country and getting their scholarship, and not even, you know, to start freshman year, but to start sophomore year. And it's important to me that young people have those types of opportunities again. And we'll talk more about that later. But Parsons was a great experience for me. It was very challenging. I mean, we carried like 21 hours and we had to work night and day. And I remember, you know, at orientation, the department head told us, you know, this is not for you if you don't sleep, eat, clean. And she wasn't kidding because it took up every waking hour. I loved it. I loved the energy of the city. I loved what I was learning. I loved, you know, getting to know my classmates. And I thrived on all the hard work. And that set the stage for a career that, you know, is a combination of being creative and craft and handwork and all that, but also, you know, being incredibly committed and focused, because this industry really demands that. And I think it's very challenging to be successful in our industry if you don't commit yourself 100%, because it's much more challenging. It's much more difficult than it looks like on TV. So, you know, that was the beginning of it all. And it started in Detroit. After I left Parsons, I actually got my first job before I graduated. And a friend who graduated before me was leaving her job. And she remembered my work and she recommended me for the job, and I interviewed. And the designer was French. Her name was Martine People, who she was an incredible woman designer. And I've always been influenced by the work of other women designers. I think we approach design a bit differently. It's not so much a fantasy of what a woman should look like. It's just about blending that with the reality of what we, how we want to feel. I never want to feel handicapped by clothing. I want to be flattered by my clothing. I love beautiful textiles and beautiful finishes and handwork and embroidery and all of the things that make garments special. And I find that in the work of a lot of other designers that are female. And I remember once there was an exhibit of female designers at FIT. And, this is like women from the 1800s and 1900s that you might not know about, Kyle Sur and Madame Gray, and so many wonderfully talented female designers. And these women were entrepreneurs long before it was easy to be a woman entrepreneur. It's still not easy. But they were making beautiful clothes and serving a customer. And for me as a designer, it's really important that I'm serving a customer, because if I'm not making something that someone wants to buy that has a use in their life, right, and has a life in their wardrobe, then I feel I'm not doing my job. So it can't all be about my ego and what I think is interesting and what the next trend is. It has to be about its real use and what it brings to the life of the customer. So after working for about 3 years, my dad, Claude Reese, said, you need to do your own thing. And I sort of looked at him like, I do? Because I had a job, I was getting paid, I was learning. But a lot of my friends had started their own businesses. And I thought about it, and the idea of having creative freedom and really having the final say about what that collection was going to look like. The thing was like draping and pattern making and illustrating and blah, blah, blah. Not a lick of business and hardly any technical beyond draping and pattern making. So I had to get some assistance, and I went to the Small Business Development Center at Pace University, and they helped me, they coached me through the process of writing this plan. And I submitted it to my dad, and he gave me seed money to start my own business. And my grandmother chipped in a little, my Aunt Rose, who owned 2 beauty shops in Detroit, she chipped in, and I was off to the races. And I launched the first collection. I had a very good sales rep who was the husband of my first boss, and she twisted his arm. And the collection was placed at Barney's and at Bergdorf and all these good stores, which was huge. And I was a wreck. I was like a 23-year-old, maybe I was 24-year-old wreck. I was living on Rolaids. The idea of, losing my dad's money, was always tantamount in my mind, because it wasn't like he was a millionaire, but he made a way for me to start that business, and I wanted to make him proud. So I was making patterns. I was running back and forth to Queens to work with a sewer to get my samples made. I was in the factory every day begging them to do my production. I was in the showroom, working with the salespeople to merchandise the collection. I was like a one-woman, whirlwind. And then I was down in landlord-tenant court, every month trying to keep my apartment, because I would take the rent money and use it to buy sample yardage, or I'd use it to pay the pattern maker or whatever. But I couldn't cover my own expenses, and I couldn't ask my dad for more money. And if you're in the fashion industry, which, it took me a little while to realize this, there's so much financial outlay before anything comes back. You're just in debt by the time you get paid by stores. And it's really challenging if you don't have deep pockets, I'll put it that way. And stores don't pay like they should. I remember my factor would send me down to Barney's, New York, accounts payable every season, because they would be at 90 days, and they owed. And, they would leave small designers out to dry. They didn't care, that you were living hand to mouth. You would have to, beg them to get paid. So as fabulous a store as it was really difficult to manage as an account. But after 18 months, I kind of succumbed.
and I went out of business, and the stock market had crashed. And, I think the goal of a lot of small designers is to reach a certain point, to have your name known, to sell to good stores, and catch the attention of someone who can back you financially. So although my dad, seeded the money, he couldn't afford to, keep supporting the business infinitely. So, with the market crash, I knew I was not going to have the opportunity to find financial backing. And Marc Jacobs at the time was just going to Perry Ellis, and he said, why don't you come with me and design portfolio for Perry Ellis? And I was like, okay, it'd be really nice to have a salary again. And I knew that I needed to grow up and get some more experience. So I went to Perry Ellis, and he also hired Tom Ford. So it was Mark, Tom, and I in design at Perry Ellis for a couple of years. And that was a great experience for me to understand how a very large company functions. And what I really understood from that is that I didn't want to be a part of a large company, because there's just too many cooks in the kitchen, and it was sort of a disappointing experience in many ways. They didn't cherish Mark's talent, and the way the business operated was pretty funky. So I was happy to leave, and I worked at other jobs in the industry for a few more years before I decided to launch my brand again. So I launched Tracy Reese in actually 1996. And I remember making the decision. I was interviewing for a job, and it was a big job, and there's a lot of money, and I was explaining how I was a hard worker and X, Y, and Z, and then I heard myself, and I saw the gleam in their eye, and I just felt like, okay, they're gonna run me into the ground. And I set the table. I told them what a hard worker I was, and I've always had a very strong work ethic. Things don't come easy. If you love what you do, you don't mind putting in the time, but you want to also be able to steer your own ship, and when you're that committed. And I knew that I just couldn't go to work for this brand, so I decided to launch again, but I did it a bit differently. I was consulting for Liz Claiborne in Jones, New York, so I had income, and literally I had another office I'd go to. I shared with another small designer, and I would go there at 5 o'clock every day and work until 10 on my stuff. So I would consult during the day, and I would work on my line at night. I was making my own patterns, making my own samples. I had another good showroom who placed the line at Saks and Nordstrom and Barney's again, and so it was a good start, but I was still living hand to mouth. And I knew that I was going to have to find a business partner who could do some of the things that I was not able to do myself. And I was introduced to a friend who we both shared the same lawyer and accountant. And I'm going to start some of the visuals here because you guys have been patiently listening to me without any visuals to aid the process. But I didn't want to start it until it was relevant. But it was the right timing for me. So in '96, I started the collection, started Tracy Reese. '97, I met my business partner, and we decided to expand the brand and also launched a second brand called Plenty by Tracy Reese, and we ended up launching a third brand, which was a small dress collection. And we grew that business organically over the space of about 10 years. We peaked in about 2008, 2009. We had reached about 30 million a year in sales at wholesale. And we had licenses for footwear, for handbags, for home, and fragrance, a few others. And we were kind of living that contemporary fashion dream. We opened a store in New York on Hudson Street. That was our flagship. And was flying to Italy to design shoes and learn, work with the cobblers, work with the last makers, just all of the things that you dream of doing as a designer. We were doing, which was amazing, but my whole life was work. And it's, there was a lot of work. But I had a great team alongside me. We had a lot of fun, and we started runway shows. I remember our first show was actually supposed to be September 11th, 2001, which was that day. And needless to say, it was postponed. But we started having regular shows every season after that, which was hugely exciting. It was a lot of fun, but it was so much work. We would literally work probably 14-hour days for about 30 days preceding a show, and the whole team would be there. And on this night, when Mrs. Obama wore a dress, we were at work. And I remember we got a call from our controller, and she's like, "Mrs. Obama's wearing her dress," and it was the Democratic National Convention. And, it was 10 o'clock at night when we saw this. We put the screens on CNN and watched her give that amazing speech. But, we were at work, and I think we were at work for another 2 hours after that, just, preparing the collection. But we had so many tremendous opportunities, and Mrs. Obama was just the dream client. She was so easy. First of all, she would literally look at lookbooks from the collection and order from the line. She wouldn't ask for custom mades or anything. She was just the most gracious and lovely client, and someone that you had tremendous respect for as well. So it was a great honor to be able to dress her. We also dressed, so many other celebrities, and it's always wonderful to see these amazing women wearing your clothes. But honestly, when I see someone on the street wearing something that I've designed, I get an even bigger high, because I know that that person has parted with their hard-earned money to buy something that we've designed and made, and that makes me extremely proud. So, this is a little bit of the runway years. Like I said, lots of fun. And you can see some of the work. We did a lot of work in India, which is such a beautiful and amazing country, so full of creativity. Every community has a different craft and a different art. And it was just an honor. My business partner was Indian, and when we decided to start our business together, he said, you might want to go and just see what you think, and if you like it, if you think you can produce there, then we'll start a second brand, and that can be made in India. And that was just an incredible experience for me to go and work with all of the artisans there. So all of the beading and all of the embroidery that we did was all done out of India, and I was able to sit with these incredible craftspeople as they embroidered our clothing and watch the process. So unforgettable, and I can't wait to get back. So after about 18 years or so in this business, I started to learn a bit more about fashion's footprint in the world, and this was probably 2017, and the face of our business had changed. Fast fashion had entered the arena. And it really greatly impacted our business and a lot of other contemporary businesses, because the stores were looking at product differently. I remember having a meeting with Nordstrom, and they used to buy Tracy Reese, and they also bought Plenty. And Plenty by Tracy Reese was mostly made in India. It was much more casual, a bit less expensive, probably 30% less expensive. And the store said to me, well, you know, this blouse is $158 at retail, but our sweet spot is $79. And we find that when a blouse is $79, the customer will come in and she'll buy 2 blouses instead of just 1. And so if you can get your prices into this range, then we can continue to work together. And I remember thinking, well, why does she need 2 blouses instead of just 1? Why not have 1 good blouse? Why does she have to buy 2 not so good blouses? Just because they're cheaper. But this was fast fashion sort of entering the psyche, you know, and the idea of having more, not better, was, you know, infiltrating fashion and definitely the consumer mindset. And it just didn't make sense. And to this day, you know, the business model for fast fashion does not make sense. And it is sort of, we have a whole generation of consumers that are addicted to it, but don't really understand the true cost of it, even to their own pocketbooks. You know, when I was raised, we had a few good things, you know, and good clothes were shared and passed around and handed down. And we had good friends, the Simses, who had a daughter, Frances, who was a little older than my sister, Leslie. Her clothes would come to Leslie, and after Leslie wore them, I would wear them. And after I wore them, they would go to my cousin Kim. And after Kim wore them, they would come back and go to my sister Erin. And it would go on like that, and those were the good things, you know, and they stayed good because we kept them in good repair. And now, you know, everybody has tons of clothes, but of questionable quality. And I really think that we have to get back to looking at quality and valuing clothes in a different way, valuing so many things, not just clothes, products in general. But toward the end of my old business, you know, we started looking also at presentations and runway in a different light. And these are actually images from a show that we did where we let the models speak. And, you know, women, especially models, are treated as such objects in our industry. You know, they're sized up, you know, how do you look? How do you look in the clothes? Is this the mood of our collection? Are you too big? Are you too small? Are you too short? Are you too tall? And it's really painful, you know, to do a casting and to judge people. I never liked that process. And early on, this was 2017, we started, you know, casting models of different ages and sizes because that's who the real customer is, and that's who I desired to dress, who I'm proud to be able to dress. So in this particular show, the models were speaking and just telling the stories of their lives because I didn't want them to be objects. I wanted them to be seen as people who were enhancing the clothing by wearing them. So anyway, around this same time, I started a program through CFDA, which is the Council of Fashion Designers of America, which was about designing more responsibly. It was about working sustainably or trying to work sustainably because nothing is 100% sustainable. And I was learning much more about fashion's footprint, how we abuse labor all over the world, how we are polluting the planet, and how we're overproducing. You know, we're overdeveloping and overproducing. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like working like a dog, like working, you know, 12-hour days, designing on weekends. We had 10 collections a year for each of our collections. So for Tracy Reese, I had 10 collections a year. For Plenty, we had 10 collections a year. For the dress collection, we had 10 collections a year. So that's 30 collections that we were designing. Plus, we would do product development with our retail partners. And we were just run ragged by this calendar and always developing. And after a point, you lose the love of what you're doing a bit because you're just satisfying the calendar, and you're getting those collections into the showroom. And the stores are asking you to ship with this kind of regularity so they can always have newness on the floor. But at the same time, they're putting merchandise on sale because they have too much merchandise in inventory. So I realized that the business model was broken, that I was working too hard, that I was not enjoying what I was doing as much as I used to, because I was working too hard to make too much, and that too much was not even needed in the world. This is a video actually that we made in Detroit, and this is part of this story, but as part of the CFDA Fashion Challenge, I had to write a blueprint for a new business. And I thought, I want to slow it down. I want to remember why I got into this business in the first place. I want to remember all the things I love about design, about creating things. And I'm not sure I need to be in New York to do that. And I was coming to Detroit on the regular. I always have. My family is there. And I was home like 5-6 times a year. And I remember looking at all of the changes that were happening and all of the property that was being snapped up and all of the building that was going on and the renovation. And at the time, my mom had passed, my dad had passed, and we did not have a family home in Detroit anymore. And I remember after my dad passed and left us each a nice amount of money, I said to my siblings, we should buy a home in Detroit so that when we're home for the holidays or any occasion, we can gather there together. And we each needed to do different things with our funds, but I ended up looking for houses in Detroit, because the neighborhoods also were rapidly gentrifying, and the beautiful old historic neighborhoods were really changing, and people were giving up their properties after having lived through the worst that Detroit could offer. They were kind of selling out because they were able to get a better price. And I knew that I wanted to be in Detroit. I also would come home and just see how segregated things were. And living in New York, you're used to living and working in such a diverse city and a diverse community. And even though, as a fashion designer and as a Black woman, honestly, for most of my career, I would be the only Black woman in the room, usually the only Black person. If there was an event for Council of Fashion Designers of America, or if Vogue was having an event, I would get invited because I was diversity, yeah, singular. And, it would just be me. And, luckily, things have begun to change quite dramatically in New York in our industry. But I was astonished to come home and sense such segregation. I would walk into a new restaurant and I'd be the only Black person there, and people would turn around and look at me like, who's that? Or why is she here? And I felt so odd about that. It's like, this is Detroit, this is an 80% almost Black city, but I'm the only person in all of these new exciting spaces so many times, and I found that frustrating. So that was also part of the reason that I wanted to launch my new business in Detroit. I wanted to be a part of kind of bridging some of that gap. And I wanted to be a part of, rebuilding a city that has given me so much. So this little film we did with some students from Wayne State University, and we called it a Detroit love song, and this was still in my old business. But I wanted to show, my Detroit and some of my influences and history. We did this little piece at Wayne State with the dance department, and my aunt was a professor of dance at Wayne State, and my mom taught dance at WC3, so it always figured really largely in our lives, and it was wonderful to go back there and have them be a part of this film. And I didn't know at the time, we did this in 2016, that I was on my way back home. But it was such a great opportunity to immerse myself in the cultural life of Detroit again. So after I completed the fashion initiative and I wrote this business plan, this vision that I had for a different model, a different business model. Fashion has been working with a broken business model for decades. We know it's not working, but it's what everybody is comfortable with. And it's challenging to turn a huge ship. It really is. And when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about changing how we work, when we talk about making less, when we talk about selling less, everybody is frightened and pretty much wants to run from the room, because how can you make the financial case for less, right? Less profit, less volume. Every year for most businesses, especially if they're publicly traded, everything is about more, and it's about growth. And yesterday I was a part of a panel for the New York Times Deal Book, and we were convened with the fashion editor, Vanessa Friedman, to talk about sustainability and to talk about where is it all going? You know, how can everything always be about growth? How much more growth can the planet sustain? You know, so it's a big question, and it's a very hard question to answer, because nobody wants to pull back. Nobody wants to go to shareholders and say, you know, we want our earnings to be flat next year. We're not projecting growth, you know, and I think in our society, success is measured by size and volume and, you know, how many celebrities you're dressing, and it's not really measured in satisfaction. It's not really measured in quality. For this business, for my new business, Hope for Flowers, and I named it Hope for Flowers because it really expresses my hopes for the planet and for people. You know, I wanted to not just have a commercial business, but I also wanted to have social impact. You know, so it's two pieces that sort of hug each other, and one part is the collection, and the other part is our community involvement and engagement. But I had to learn how to start again. So this is 3.0. And, you know, some of these pieces you're looking at, I made the patterns for. So when I started again, I knew I wanted to get my arms around it again. I wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to be a part of the full process of design and making things again, because that's the part that I love. I don't love managing 30, 35 people. I don't love, you know, being run by a calendar and overdeveloping. So this was about, you know, doing what I love again, but also doing it in community, having collaboration with other artisans and craftspeople in Detroit, working with my old high school, Cass Tech, you know, the very first collection of Hope for Flowers. We had interns from Cass Tech who screen printed the fabrics with me, along with a great print designer, Shayla Johnson in Detroit. And, you know, I was getting my hands dirty again. And we made the samples in Flint, and we made the production in Flint at St. Luke's New Life, a little factory that is rehabilitating people and teaching them craft and work that they can support themselves with. So they're teaching women to sew, they teach men to tend lawns and other things. So it was a great experience of working locally. And it proved that I can do it, that I can have a business based in Detroit and still have a national and even global presence. But the big goal, too, is to show that Detroit can be a center for sustainable clothing design and production. So now I have a team of 6 in Detroit where we design Hope for Flowers. We make a lot of samples there as well. We've done some small batch production, but in order to really be successful at that, we know that we have to apprentice and train people at this level of production and sewing. So we're in the process of designing an apprenticeship for sewing that will be DOL certified, so people can get stackable credits. We also have community engagement and art enrichment. So, you know, like I said, as a child, I loved my Saturday art classes. And, you know, one of the heartbreaking things about Detroit Public Schools today is that there aren't art classes in every school for every child, you know, all the way through, like I had. In 2019, there were 17% of schools had one art teacher and one music teacher. And maybe 23% of schools had an art teacher, maybe not a music teacher. Another 24% had a music teacher, but maybe not an art teacher. And those figures are heartbreaking and appalling because I know how much those classes meant to me as a child and how much they fed into my, you know, becoming a designer. So I wanted to be able to offer free art enrichment to young people. So Hope for Flowers has Saturday classes for young people for free if you're a Detroit Public School student or Detroit Charter School student. And we teach the rudiments and the basics, but we also teach sustainability, and we reuse things, and we recycle, and we upcycle. And they're learning about local artists that they might not have known about. And it's been incredible. We also have Thursday night classes for adults. So this is about community and about coming together and creating together. And as someone who loves to craft and sew or paint or whatever, I know that a lot of times I won't do it by myself at home. And sometimes you don't have the space, sometimes you don't have the supplies, sometimes you just don't have the company. And, you know, there have been times when my sister Leslie has visited me and, you know, she's on one corner of the couch and she's writing because she's a writer. And I'm on the other corner and I'm sketching and we're listening to great music, and it's very inspiring to do that in community. So I wanted to offer that experience to adults. And we have, you know, such a great group of people who attend our classes from ages 18 to 90 who are coming in making memory boxes or wrapping jewelry with found textiles or binding books. So we have a variety of classes, and we'll continue to do so. So these have been, you know, very well received. We also have community workshops that are around sustainability. So our first workshop was recycling, and it's amazing, you know, what we all don't know about recycling. We had Detroit Green Sciences come in and, you know, brush up. Like, I did not know you couldn't recycle plastic utensils. I did not know that. So, you know, we had to brush up, and they signed people up for blue cans right there so that they could walk off with something ticked off the list and done. We also did a workshop on composting, which is something I'd been dying to learn about, and we compost in our office in Detroit now. And we recently had a workshop on mending, which people absolutely loved, and we gave out mending kits because we've lost these foundational skills. If you have something that you love and you've stopped wearing it because it has a hole or a rip or a button has fallen off or the hem has come down, you should be able to repair it, that thing you love, and extend its life. And that's part of sustainability. So at Hope for Flowers, our goal is to only use textiles that are sustainable, things that will biodegrade without hurting the planet. But mostly we want to make a quality product that will last and that you'll love and that will have a life in your wardrobe and serve a purpose in your life. And I remember, when I started my first business and I was really struggling and felt so alone. And I would, join little business groups. And at my church, they had a Wednesday night group called Successful Business Support Group. And I would go there on Wednesday night, and there was just this gathering of entrepreneurs. And I remember someone, people were doing such good work and social work and community work. And I remember, someone turned to me and they were like, well, what do you do, Tracy? And I was like, I design clothes. And I was like, sort of like, ugh, this is not important. And her eyes lit up and she said to me, wow, that's amazing. She said, you have the power to make people feel good about themselves. And I never looked at my work the same way again. And I think as someone who is blessed to have a career doing something that you love, doing it and with the idea of creating things that other people will love, that hopefully they feel confident in, that they feel flattered by, and that they love, that makes it so much more meaningful. We can't do this in a vacuum. We can't do it without each other. And that was a huge lesson for me that I've carried throughout my career. And like I said, seeing people wearing our clothes and loving them, seeing them post themselves in our clothes, or we get emails about, how they love what they've purchased from us, that makes us feel incredible. I think in terms of sustainability, this is a journey, and yesterday's task force was all about, how do we solve this huge problem within our industry? How do we educate consumers? How do we make it important for them? At the end of the day, I want people to be attracted to Hope for Flowers because it's responsibly designed and produced. But I want them first to come because they love the clothes. I don't want anybody just to buy it because it's sustainable. You have to love it first. And then it's my job to make sure that it's sustainably made and that we're respecting the workers along the supply chain that are making these beautiful things. One of the other reasons that it was important for me to launch this brand and to learn how to work differently is also learning about who the labor really is, who is really making our clothes. And globally, 80% of the people making clothing are women. And 80% of those women are women of color. And they're not making a living wage in more than 80% of the circumstances. There are people that are making 6 cents a garment for fast fashion garments. They're making $30 a month. I just read an article that in Bangladesh, the minimum wage is $30 a month. And people can't feed their families or pay their rent. And most people are living in dormitories at factories and sending a portion of that $30 to their families who live in other areas. And that's so unacceptable. I want the people that are making our clothes to have as good a quality of life as we have. And I want it to be important to customers and consumers to know that the clothing is ethically made and to elevate the voices of the craftspeople along the chain. There are so many hands that are laid on every garment, from the harvesting of fibers to the weaving and the dyeing, to the cutting, the sewing, the embellishment. There are hundreds of hands that touch these clothes before we have the honor of wearing them. So it's important to respect those hands and to treasure your purchases, to purchase wisely, to do some research, to look for quality, to look behind the label. And less can be more. I have a smaller business that feeds my soul, and that is a perfect third act for me. And I'm able to do it in a city that has given me so much. So I'm just grateful and excited for everything that's coming next. So with that, I think I'm just about done. Yeah. I'm looking through my notes. I always write these notes and I never look at them. And the writing is so small, I have to put my glasses on just to see if I forgot to tell you anything I wanted to say. But I think we will be opening the floor up for questions in a couple of minutes. So please stick around if there's anything that you'd like to ask.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Let's give another round of applause. That was so beautiful, uplifting, and inspiring. If you can please, for those of you who have to get to class, please leave the theater quietly. We are going to transition into a Q&A with Tracy. Please line up to ask your questions at the top of each aisle. And without further ado, let's bring back Tracy, and we'll start on this side, house left, with your question first, and we'll rotate from left to right.
Left to right?
She's gonna start right.
Oh, I think it's my left. Hello.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I can verbalize this correctly, but I know that I've heard people talk about how I've heard some people who make clothes talk about how they think they should be made like based off of just sizing instead of like separated by gender and everything. And I know there's also this push like in women's clothing to make things more utilitarian because you can fit a Nintendo Switch in a guy's pocket and you can fit maybe an iPhone 4S in a woman's pocket. And iPhone 4Ss were made in 2012. So I was just wondering if you had any commentary on that push, if you think that they're good ideas, et cetera.
You know what? I think they're all good ideas. To be honest, the goal is for there to be enough variety, right? Enough different approaches for each person to be able to choose what suits them, what suits their lifestyle. It's always been important to me. We put pockets in everything, but do I want to put something big in this pocket and look bigger on the bottom? I might not use it, but I might kind of go like this to be cute. But, whomever wants to wear my clothes and feel good in them, regardless of whatever sex they were assigned at birth, I want them to wear my clothes and feel good in them. And, we're in a time in fashion where, there are just new horizons opening up. The lines are blurred, and they should be. You should be able to wear whatever makes you feel the most yourself. And clothing should have utility. I think that's important. But sometimes you just want to look incredible, and you don't care. So, there are those options too, but it's a great time for fashion. I love looking at what's happening in traditional menswear because it's not traditional anymore. Those are the most exciting things. So yeah, whatever makes you feel the most yourself, you should be able to find and wear with pride.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Khalida Hamoud. It's nice to meet you. Thanks for being here today. I'm wondering, when you're reaching out to the Nordstrom and all those stores that you provided your clothes to, how did you actually build that connection, and how did you what did you give them to make your plan known, what they yeah.
It's a journey. At my very first job, where I was an assistant designer, I was invited to sit in on product development meetings. So, if we were making something exclusively for a certain store, I'd be there taking notes, making suggestions, and the buyers knew me. They got to know me. And when I started my own collection, a lot of them knew who I was. So, you don't come out of school and have those kinds of relationships automatically. That's why a lot of times, not a lot of times, but always, I will encourage people, after you leave school, take a job. Learn your craft, become known in whatever way, become known for doing a good job, okay? Become known for, being on top of things, being that person with some answers, and soak it up. We don't always have to be front and center. Those formative years are really to hone our craft, to understand who we are as designers and who the customers really are, because we don't really meet the customers in school. That real living customer who has a need for your clothing. She's not always, 21 years old and a size 4 with lots of money, to buy really beautiful artistic things that she can only wear to a fabulous affair, right? She's got a real life. Maybe she's 50 years old and she's got, places that she needs to go and look good. And how can you make her look great and feel great, in those spaces? So it's important to give yourself time to learn your craft, to learn from others, to show people how great you are, how talented you are, how great a job you can do. And then when you're ready to make that leap, if having your own brand is what you want, hopefully you have a little reputation and people can believe in you and what you have to offer.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering how one would go about working or volunteering for Hope for Flowers, specifically the educational things that you do. And I guess the part 2 to my question would be, do you know of any other arts education volunteering endeavors that are occurring in the Detroit, Washtenaw area?
Definitely. We're always open for volunteers. I think you can send an email to me. I'm Tracy at hopeforflowers.com. Also, we have an artisan studio email, artisan studio, and our art enrichment program is run by Mandisa Smith. She's an artist in her own right, and she has a huge community of other artists that she brings in to teach. We have a wonderful teacher, Taylor Childs, who teaches at CCS in their K through 12, but she's also getting her master's at Cranbrook right now. And she teaches our youth classes, and we have teaching assistants as well. Taylor needs a break sometimes, and the kids absolutely love her, but we're always interested in people who have something to offer, who have stories to tell, and who want to make sure that young people have enriching and beautiful experiences. So just reach out, send me an email.
Awesome, thank you so much.
What is your name?
Chelsea.
Chelsea, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'll
Thanks,
look out
Grace.
for it.
Bye.
Hi, my name is Anna. I am a fiber artist at Stamps, and I do mainly experimental fashion, and I focus on sustainability. So not really a question, but just one, thank you so much for tonight. This is exactly something that I'm so passionate in. I just did a research paper on sustainability, and I'm making fashion and costumes with secondhand material. So this was just so amazing and so inspiring. And I don't know, just wanted to thank you for that. And like the last person was saying, I would love to try and be involved with your company in some way, volunteering or interning, making anything, because this is just exactly the kind of world that I would love to go into, and your story and how you made it in this industry is just so impactful. So thank you so much.
I'm glad. And you know, it's really going to be up to you guys, this generation, to turn this ship, you know, because you're looking at everything with fresh eyes, and you're inheriting this world, you know, so you're passionate about making that right kind of change where we can do what we love and we can make beautiful things without tearing down the planet and trashing the planet and you know, abusing the people who are making our products. So, you know, I'm counting on all of you, you know, because there are a lot of old garmentos still at the helm of this ship, and they're not looking to change anything. Yeah, so, yeah, please reach out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll definitely be sending some emails.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Tracy. My name is Sophie, and I'm also a student at Stamps. And I also wanted to start off by saying thank you for choosing authenticity and respect for workers and the planet over everything else is offered to everyone. And that's just so inspiring for everyone here, because we are, like you said, inheriting this world. So I just wanted to first say thank you. But the question that I had was, I am working on a project right now where I'm looking into specifically female figures in Detroit who are working to build the community back up. And when you were speaking, I was just thinking of the irony of like Highland Park and how Henry Ford and like the assembly line was what brought, you know, Detroit down because of the rise and fall of it. Yeah. And so I think it's beautiful that you're starting in that, like in the ashes of that, and bringing sustainability back to Detroit when it was once a place of assembly lines and working out as much as you can. So the question that I had was, what is your vision for Detroit and what you hope for it to look like, say, in the next 5-10 years?
That's you know, I hope that it's more equitable. I think there are so many people who have been overlooked, you know, in this kind of race to build a new Detroit. And I think that there are a lot of neighborhoods that have not been touched with any loving hands. And, you know, people are still struggling. And so I hope it's a more equitable city where everyone is invited to the table to enjoy, you know, all the fresh, new, fun stuff. And some of the neighborhoods that are struggling, you know, are getting some attention, the right kind of attention. You know, and definitely for the schools, you know, I know that they're trying to install art teachers in schools. There's been a big push, and if anyone wants to be an art educator, there could be opportunity for you in Detroit. But I hope that young people are having these rich opportunities, that they don't have to search for them. You know, there's kind of a two generations that have suffered through this. So if you're a young mom, you know, and art classes were taken out of school, like, in the late 2000s, 2007, 6, whenever, I forget when the bankruptcy was, but things were already going downhill before then, and a lot of the schools had been stripped. You could have a young child now who's starting school who's also not benefiting, and you don't know what they're missing because you didn't have it. You know, so, you know, we need people to be a part of bringing joy and love of art and culture to young people. So I hope in 5 years' time, there will be more opportunities for young people to express themselves positively. I was talking to somebody, and
we were talking about a lot, especially after the pandemic, children are living on their phones. There's video games, and then there's social media tearing them down, hour by hour, day by day, with all the things that they can't do and don't have. And it's like, if we can take them from being observers, they're observing someone else's life and someone else's good fortune. If we can take them from being observers to creators, create your life. Stop looking at someone else's. How can we help them do that? So I would like to see some more of that direction kind of materialize in 5 years.
Thank you so much. I'll send
Pleasure.
you an email too.
Do that.
We have time for 2 more questions as the House has to turn over for a film tonight. So we'll start over here and we'll wrap up over there.
Hi, Tracy. I'm Libby. It's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I loved your presentation. Your philosophy and story were amazing. And I wanted to hear, also I wanted to say that the student section, not to call them out, but they're rarely so quiet. So you were very captivating, clearly.
I was the one falling asleep in the front row when I was in Parsons, and illustrious people would come to speak to us, and I pulled an all-nighter, and we would literally sit in the front row so we'd be too embarrassed to fall asleep, and then you'd wake up at the end like, oh my God, I fell asleep in front of Donna Karen. Anyway.
Same. I was wondering about your inspiration, where you get it from. Perhaps this dress, it's amazing, so anywhere.
Thank you. And I meant to talk about that because inspiration is key, and I think as a creative and as a designer, it's our responsibility to keep ourselves inspired, right? Because how can we create beauty, how can we share if we don't keep ourselves inspired? God, so much. I like to go to galleries and museums. I love looking at artwork, at painting, at sculpture, at collage work. There's so much incredible work to see these days. And I love just watching people on the street. How are you really wearing clothes? I'm an old magazine whore. I love magazines, and it's a dying industry, and it makes me so, so sad. But when you see a really inspired layout, an incredible photographer, a great stylist, and just a fresh take on, clothing that you might have seen like a dozen times, that's always inspiring. It's just, that kind of creativity is in action, and you want to be a part of that, that stream. So could be anything, could be a book I read, could be, sometimes I'll just sit out and watch people go by, and it's like, oh yeah, I love how they're doing that, So, yeah, but it's important. We have to find that inspiration around us. One of the most beautiful quotes I ever heard was Bill Cunningham. How many people know who Bill Cunningham is? Great photographer, right? And, there was a documentary about him, and I was brought to tears because he said, if you look for beauty, you will find it. And that is so true in every situation, but you have to be open to it, right? So keep your eyes open, love life. You'll find plenty of things that you love.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Tracy. My name is Jada. I want to start off by saying I love your outfit, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It's very inspirational. So you mentioned that, in the early stages of your career, is that you were the only person of color. So my question is, how did you overcome that step of your life, and what would be advice to step out of the diversity statement for only those people?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think this is where, kind of being a business owner and needing to succeed, not just wanting to, but needing to. You have to step outside of your comfort zone so many times. I'm an introverted person. These situations are not the easiest for me, but I learned that by being quiet and standing back, I wasn't serving myself or my cause or my my vision. And so I had to learn to speak up. I had to learn to be comfortable where I was not comfortable. And I still go to plenty of functions and I'm not comfortable, but I'm gonna smile and I'm gonna find somebody I know, or I'm gonna try to meet somebody who I can talk to so that I can have a good time and show the best of me if I can. But it's not always easy. And it's definitely challenging when you feel like you're the only person like you in the room. But you have to get beyond it, and you have to, it's your opportunity, okay? You have to see these situations as opportunities, just to show your best self and kind of step out of, be comfortable being uncomfortable. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Someday this is not going to be an issue, but it still is. If you're a woman trying to get a loan to start a business, it's still a challenge. If you're a person of color, it's still a challenge. People don't take you seriously. They don't believe in you. That's real. But don't let it stop you from reaching for your dreams. There's always another way. There's always another way. You have to be creative, but there's a way.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, everybody. Let's give another warm round of applause for Tracy Reese.
Thank you all.
Good night.